Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Kelly Victory, flying solo today. Dr. Drew is tied up with some other engagements, so I am holding down the fort on my own with a great guest. I have really been looking forward to this show today with Dr. Brian Hooker, not because I'm solo hosting, but because I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Dr. Hooker just co-authored a book with Bobby Kennedy Jr. called Vax-Unvax, Let the Science Speak. Really important work. This book looks at over 100 studies in the peer-reviewed literature that interestingly considered the differences between vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. Every single one of the studies is analyzed and looks at the outcomes from infants, children, and adults based on their vaccination status. They come to some interesting conclusions. And what's important about this, I'm going to give further details about Dr. Hooker's background and how it is that he came to this when I bring him on in just a little bit. But the important thing, and the reason I was so interested in this, is because anyone who's been watching the recent shows, including last week when I was on with Dr. Joseph Freeman and Jessica Rose, and one of the things that I've really been hammering home in these last shows is that although the COVID pandemic has really shined a light on the tragedy that we're seeing right now with the mRNA vaccines and some problems, significant problems related to the pandemic response, the obsession with control and the fallacy of masking and social distancing, all of this stuff. What is important, I think, for people to know is that this is exposing a problem that has been decades in the making. The problems with our regulatory agencies, the fraud, the corruption, the lack of scientific rigor, the conflicts of interest, the capture of our scientific journals, the co-option of physicians and physician groups, all of this long predated COVID, people. And that's what I think we need to focus on. And what I love about this book that Brian Hooker and Bobby Kennedy Jr. have put forth is that it really long predates COVID. Yes, there's a section on COVID in there, but they look at the hepatitis vaccinations and HPV vaccinations, and they really look at the lack of scientific rigor and expose and explain what it is that we haven't been doing. What are the studies that the CDC has refused to do? Why haven't they looked at these vaccinated versus unvaccinated populations with the kind of scientific rigor that Dr. Hooker and Bobby Kennedy have? So I think keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about this specific book, that the issues that we are seeing with COVID and the pandemic long predated the past 3.5 years. This pandemic has just, I think, shined a very necessary light on it. And we need to figure out how to fix this, or, just removing these mRNA vaccinations, for example, from the market will not fix the systemic problem that we have in our regulatory agencies. So we'll take a break, go to our, get the business out of the way, as it were, and then I will come back and do a proper introduction of Dr. Hooker.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous. I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that? I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I think everyone knows the next medical crisis could be just around the corner, whether it comes in the form of another pandemic or something much more routine like a tick bite, You and your family need to be prepared. That's where the Wellness Company comes in. You know the Wellness Company. We have their physicians on, like Dr. McCullough, frequently. The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy.
It's a safety net. It's an insurance policy
absolutely.
that you hope you're not going to
100%.
need, but if you need it, you sure as heck are going to wish you had it if you need it.
Be ready for anything. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. The medical emergency kit provides a guidebook to aid in the safe use of all these life-saving medications. From anthrax to tick bites to COVID-19, the Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is exactly what you need to have on hand to be prepared. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next. Go to drdrew.com/TWC. That is DRDREW.com/TWC to get 10% off today. Just click on that link. There are 3 reasons the central banks are dumping the US dollar: inflation, deficit spending, and our insurmountable national debt. The fact is, there is one asset that has withstood famine, wars, political and economic upheaval dating back to biblical times: gold. And you can own it in a tax-sheltered retirement account with the help of Birch Gold. That's right, Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k, maybe from a previous employer, into an IRA in gold. And the best part, you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Just visit birchgold.com/Drew for your free info kit. They'll hold your hand through the entire process. Think about this. When currencies fail, gold is a safe haven. How much more time does the dollar have? Birch Gold has an A+ rating with Better Business Bureau and thousands of happy customers. I do not give financial advice, and previous performance is no guarantee of future performance. Visit birchgold.com/Drew to get your free info kit on gold. That is birchgold.com/DREW.
Welcome. We are going to be bringing back our guest, Dr. Brian Hooker. As I said, I've been very excited about this because Brian Hooker just co-authored a book with Bobby Kennedy Jr. that we're going to talk about in some depth. But regarding Dr. Hooker's background, he is welcome. Nice to have you. Dr. Hooker is the chief scientific officer of the Children's Health Defense, which is an organization long dedicated to the protection of and promotion of the health of children, not just in the United States, but worldwide. You have an undergraduate degree, I understand, in chemical engineering and a PhD in biochemical engineering. Your list of credits is quite long, including 5 different patents. You've authored more than 65 papers in the scientific and engineering literature, peer-reviewed literature that's published internationally, and that includes more than 20 papers on the epidemiology of vaccine injuries. I know that you've been involved for years now in exposing corruption at the CDC and perhaps FDA in particular with regard to vaccine safety and how those studies, quote unquote, are actually done. And then fast forward, you have now co-authored this book that I was talking about before the break with regard to comparing vaccinated versus unvaccinated populations. And I really do want to get into the weeds on that. But let's start. First of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
And
it's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. How is it that someone with an undergraduate degree in engineering, chemical engineering, and a PhD in biochemical engineering becomes a vaccine expert? Start with what led you down that path.
Well, actually, it started when my son, Stephen, who is now 25 years old, sustained a vaccine injury when he was about 15 months old. And on that particular day, he had an active ear infection, and he received 3 different vaccines while having an active ear infection. And that was really, it was in hindsight, although the nurse practitioner said, oh, this is fine, we vaccinate sick kids all the time, it was contraindicated, and he should not have received those vaccines because he was sick. And then the more that we delved into sort of his medical frailty, some of his genetics, his genotype, his biochemical makeup, we found that really his makeup was very, very unsuited to vaccination in general. And so, what happened after his 15-month vaccines was that he fevered. And after he fevered, he sustained a very, very profound neurological injury due to neuroinflammation. He lost all eye contact. He lost all speech. And then by the time, 3 months later at his well baby checkup at 18 months, he was diagnosed with full-blown autism. And so I was very pro-vaccine up to that time. But this was really, a very, very much an eye opener, watching it play out with my very own son, and it was very intuitive and very obvious something had gone wrong around his infant vaccinations.
Let me just say, so prior to that vaccination date, was he meeting what you would consider a normally developing child? He was meeting his normal developmental milestones, things of that sort until that date?
Well, he was sort of slow normal. It was an interesting phenomenon because back when my son was vaccinated, most of the vaccines that he received contained mercury through the preservative called thimerosal. And so mercury was very toxic, and it was especially toxic to his system in hindsight. So he was normal, but he was sort of lagging behind a little bit. He would pass his developmental milestones when we would take him into his baby checkup. But even prior to that, we really felt like there's something wrong here, and we want to get to the bottom of it because it seemed like things were progressing more slowly than, obviously what we had desired. But then what happened at 15 months was truly cataclysmic.
Yeah, and I had told you before we came on, I was planning on sort of leading into an ending with your personal story, but since I asked you the question of how you got into this, I've reversed the order, and I appreciate you being willing to share your own family experience with this. What you're saying is absolutely in line with what I've heard from so many people, and I think until I started really delving into this and talking with people like Bobby Kennedy about it and others who have done a lot more research than I had, this story is the one you hear over and over again, that parents say, this child, something clearly happened that day. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't, that there was it was as if a switch flipped, that this child went from being, relatively normal or relatively normal to profoundly abnormal. And it sounds like that was your experience as well.
Absolutely. Prior to his 15 months vaccinations, he was talking. He had about 10 words. He was walking after his vaccination, and after he fevered, then he refused to walk unassisted, and it was almost like he had lost some of his equilibrium. And he stopped acknowledging us. No more joint attention. And just looking away instead of looking at us directly, and it just seemed to really spiral very, very quickly after those 15-month shots. And it was unheard of at that time. The typical age for a diagnosis of autism was 42 months. And so getting an early diagnosis at 18 months was really, my wife and I were perplexed, befuddled, obviously very, very sorrowful for what had happened. And all of a sudden we were faced with this diagnosis of autism.
Were the pediatricians or whoever you were seeing at the time open to the idea? Did they acknowledge that this was likely vaccine related or not?
No, the pediatrician and the nurse practitioner that actually gave us the advice really had absolved vaccines from any type of harm and would not talk to us about my son's vaccine injury. It wasn't until we were referred to an integrative pediatrician when my son was 2 years of age that we got somebody to actually listen to us. And the integrative pediatrician said at the time, looked at the laboratory results, looked at some of the toxics that were coming out of my son's urine, feces, hair, when we were doing simple challenges, and said, look, your son is a very, very toxic child. No more vaccines.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, so this clearly, is the answer to the question: how is it that somebody who is an engineer becomes interested or fascinated in this particular topic and becomes an expert in it? Fast forward now and talk a little bit about way before you got into writing this book. You were involved in early 2000s and then certainly in 2000, I think it was 12 or 13, in exposing some, for lack of a better word, fraud, fraudulence, corruption, whatever, in terms of the CDC's testing or what they were doing with regard to vaccine safety testing. Talk a little bit about that and what was happening there.
Absolutely. I started investigating the CDC in 2001 because they were starting to address the question of vaccines and autism. And back then, they were only looking at two real facets of a very, very complex problem. And they were looking at thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative in vaccines and its relationship to autism. And then they were looking at the MMR vaccine and autism based on, some of the early work of Dr. Andrew Wakefield. And so I started investigating some of the answers that I was receiving from the CDC, and I've got letters behind my name. I thought I'll just pick up the phone and I'll call these CDC scientists. And I was receiving some very, very unscientific answers, sort of a brusque brush off of my concerns regarding vaccine safety. And I had done statistics throughout my research. I had done it in graduate school. I worked in a Department of Energy national laboratory. And so I knew that somebody was really trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And so I started to submit Freedom of Information Act requests to get to the bottom of what the private conversations were behind the scenes at the CDC regarding vaccines and neurodevelopmental disabilities such as autism. Well, fast forward to 2013, and over this time, I had really pounded the CDC with many, many Freedom of Information Act requests. But then all of a sudden in 2013, I received a phone call from one Dr. William Thompson, a senior epidemiologist in the Immunization Safety Office at the CDC, and it was from his private line. And Dr. Thompson really started to confess some of the fraud that I had been aware of and I had been suspecting all of these years. And Dr. Thompson really not only exposed this fraud by sharing about 10,000 pages worth of emails with me, having many, many phone conversations with me, exchanging emails time and time again, almost on a daily basis. But he also pointed me to data that I could reanalyze that basically showed that there was a strong statistically significant relationship primarily between the timing of the MMR vaccine and autism. And the two groups that really stood out in that analysis were African American males, who were 3 times as likely to get an autism diagnosis if they got the MMR on time compared to if they waited until after 36 months of age. And then also what's called isolated autism or regressive autism, like my son who regressed into autism. That group also showed a significant relationship between the timing of the MMR vaccine and autism incidents. And so the whistleblower actually, Dr. Thompson, came forward publicly with his confessions in August of 2014. I ended up publishing a paper based on those results. After the whistleblower story broke, my paper was retracted. It was very, very difficult. I was the type of child that in high school, I never got detention. So getting a retraction of a paper, and it was under the most dubious of circumstances. The journal actually never told me why the paper was retracted. So I went ahead and I republished the information, and it appeared in another journal in 2018. And so this whole whistleblower story, the story of Dr. William Thompson, then became the subject of a movie called Vax, Cover Up to Catastrophe, that came out in 2016. And many, many people saw that movie, Vax. It was supposed to appear at the Tribeca Film Festival, and it was taken out of the lineup very, very quickly. But that piqued the public's interest. And so many, many people then were wondering why did they take this movie out? Why do people not want us to see this movie? And so the CDC whistleblower story of Dr. William Thompson and myself then gained a lot of notoriety, a lot of traction through that time, through 2016 and beyond.
So, all right. So just to clarify, Brian, so Dr. Thompson disclosed to you and then subsequently made public that if I understand, that
yes.
Not only that the CDC, that there was a connection between autism and specifically the MMR vaccines, but that the CDC was fully aware of it. Is that what you're saying? That this was information that the CDC had and was failing to disclose to the public or denying? I mean, what was the CDC's stance on it?
The CDC's official stance has always been vaccines do not cause autism, and you can actually visit a CDC website that says that. But as of November 7th, 2001, they had come up with a statistically significant relationship, and it had been shared with the highest levels of management at the CDC. Indeed, the director of the CDC at the time, Dr. Julie Gerberding, knew that the CDC scientist had found a relationship. And then she specifically in 2004, when the fraudulent pediatrics paper came out that had altered data in it, she participated in the cover-up herself. And when Dr. Thompson back in 2004 tried to warn her, he was put on administrative leave of absence. And so, CDC is known for many, many years that this relationship has existed, but they keep it in the dark. They have never brought this to light, and it's truly unfortunate. I think of the many, many people whose lives could be spared, having a family member with autism, having autism themselves. Because it was a strong, undeniable, statistically significant relationship.
And we're going to cut to a break first and then come back and get into this as well as the book. But before I do, I want to make this as in the spirit of full disclosure. I, Dr. Kelly Victory, up until probably 3 years ago, have said, I can't even count how many times I had made the statement, quote, there is no credible evidence that vaccines are associated with autism. And I say that not with pride. I said it because we as physicians, and this is the existential crisis that I and others in my industry are in, I relied on the information that I believed was correct. I relied on what the CDC, the FDA, the scientific journals were saying. I went to the source. I went to the studies, and there were no studies that were available because they were hiding it. They had the information and they did not allow us to see it. And so I and others, I've truly, Brian, believed that there was no evidence of it, that there was not a scintilla of scientific literature that supported the association. And I am horrified now, really, to find that that I was duped, I was lied to. It's not that I was lazy and didn't look. It's that I was not allowed to avail myself of the literature, of the studies that were available, that had been done, because clearly the CDC knew, and I am angry about it. I am, sad about it. And I have, truly done everything I can now to expose this and to bring people like you who have known about this, to give them a platform to be able to share this with others, because I think it's critically important. But again, this long predated COVID, people, and it long predated the debacle that we are seeing with these mRNA vaccines. And so we have got to really do this deep analysis and look into what did the CDC know, when did they know it, and why were they hiding it. So with that, we'll go to a quick break and then come back. And I want to dive a little bit more into the specifics of what happened back in 2012, 13, 14 with the whistleblower, and then get into the weeds on your book. So we'll be back in a minute.
Fall is right around the corner, which means dry, flaky red skin from allergy season is coming with it. But the best way to take care of your skin is with our skincare secret, Genucel. You don't need to worry about that puffy, tired eye look or those annoying dark spots or even dry, flaky skin because Genucel Skincare has you covered. Susan and I love our Genucel products so much, we want you to try our personally curated skincare bundles. It's risk-free at Genucel.com/Drew. Genucel works so well, you can see the results in this unplanned live moment on our show when the Redness Repair Cream repaired my skin in just minutes right before your eyes. Their concentrated vitamin C serum helps keep your skin plump and hydrated. Plus, with their immediate effects, you can see astonishing results in under 12 hours. Quick, effective, and easy. Go to Genucel.com/Drew right now to try our bundles and save over 60% today. And remember to enroll in Genucel's world-class concierge program for additional savings and free shipping. Don't wait. It's Genucel.com/Drew. Genucel.com/DREW. I want to share with you a teeth whitening system that goes beyond merely enhancing your smile. Primal Life Organics Real White Teeth Whitening System offers convenience and rapid results without harsh chemicals. Light, blue light for whitening, red light for gum and oral hygiene, and you can just do both if you wish. Works naturally, promoting gum healing, tooth remineralization, gives you a brighter and a healthier smile. Again, no peroxide involved. Consistent usage yields remarkable results. Take this opportunity to transform your smile and at the same time, optimize your oral health. Aim for 5 times a week for the best outcomes. Discover more about this remarkable teeth whitening system and other products at drdrew.com/primal today. That again is drdrew.com/PRIMAL. Be sure to use that link for 60% off. drdrew.com/PRIMAL. Do it today for 60% off. Some platforms have banned the discussion of controversial topics. If this episode ends here, the rest of the show is available at drdrew.tv.
There's nothing in medicine that doesn't boil down to a risk-benefit calculation. It is the mandate of public health to consider the impact of any particular mitigation scheme on the entire population. This is uncharted territory, Drew.
Yeah, welcome back. My guest today is Dr. Brian Hooker, Chief Scientific Officer of the Children's Health Defense and co-author of a recent book with Bobby Kennedy Jr. called Vax-Unvax, Let the Science Speak. It occurred to me at the break, Brian, that one of the things just to level set for those people who might not be familiar with the term thimerosal and the concept that vaccines, there's the active ingredient. For example, in the current COVID vaccines, the active ingredient is the mRNA. But there are a lot of ingredients that we are told are inert, or what we call adjuvants in medicine, that are things that are added in addition to the active ingredient. And at the time, thimerosal, which is essentially a mercury-containing preservative, was added to vaccines to enhance their shelf life. Other adjuvants or things are added to vaccines commonly, like aluminum. Aluminum specifically was added to some vaccines because it increased the inflammatory response, and that was felt to be helpful. That if you increase inflammation, you will get a better immune response as a result. But many times, what I think we are finding out is that these adjuvants, it's the additional things, whether it's the thimerosal, the aluminum, the lipid nanoparticles in the case of the COVID vaccines, that by themselves are toxic and create real havoc. And so I think that it sounds like in your son's case that you believe that it was the mercury component that may have induced much of his problem. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think that a lot of his problem was mercury. And when we tested him, indeed, when we looked at, hair metals, urine metals, and fecal metals, when we just did mild detoxification, mercury really started to pour out of his system very, very rapidly. And, to the extent that at one point his hair clippings would have been considered toxic waste because the mercury levels were so high. And so that really played a strong factor. He also received the oral polio vaccine, which is no longer on the market. It's a live virus vaccine. And I believe that was responsible for a lot of the inflammation that we saw, especially after his 15 months vaccinations. And so, I think that it's difficult to say, is it one thing?
Sure.
These children genetically are hyperaccumulators of toxins. They do not detoxify well. And so, it was sort of a constellation of things, including, I think, most certainly,